Okay. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first in-mind speaker, David Hell. David Hell is an associate professor at Cunningham University in the Robotics Institute, and he's director of Architect Lab and robot perceiving and doing. And his research focused on perceptual robot learning. He obtained a PhD degree from Stanford, and he's recipient of a Google Faculty Research Award in 2017 and NSF Korea Award 2021. So he will be talking about neural object representations for grasping and image.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about a few different ways that neural representations can be used to capture objects for grasping and manipulation. So the first challenge I'm going to talk about is how can we learn to manipulate deformable objects with tools for sequential tasks. So here's a visualization of what we eventually want to do. So we have some dough and some initial configuration. And what we want to do is transform this dough into some final configuration using a sequence of dough manipulation skills. Here we have different tools that can cut the dough, rearrange the dough into different configurations, and finally spread the dough into different shapes. So how are we going to achieve this? So the challenges involved in this task include long horizon reasoning over different tool use, and the fact that we have this high dimensional state of deformable objects. So dough can take many different shapes, and how can we capture that? So essentially we need to do a combination of planning, but with these kind of deformable objects that probably involve some kind of learning type method that we're going to use. Our high level idea here is to first learn short horizon skills. Here you can see 5 different skills that we're going to learn: lift, spread, gather, push, and cut. These are all different manipulation skills that you can apply to the dough. Then we will plan how to chain these skills together to achieve the task. And finally, we will execute the plan. So this long horizon task is related to previous work in task and motion planning. However, in which there's typically some manual specification of states, predicates, and motion primitives. For example, grasp, hand over, place, etc. However, task and motion planning typically has been applied to symbolic representations of objects, which is very hard to apply to deformable objects such as dough that can take a continuous representation in terms of the dough shape. Another approach that's related to the kind of approach we're going to be looking at is hierarchical reinforcement learning, which can be used to solve longer horizon tasks by reasoning at both the high and low level with reinforcement learning. For example, using an option framework, and you can discover this hierarchy. However, learning both the high and low level policies can create training difficulties. So we're going to instead take the approach shown here, in which we will first learn short horizon skills and then figure out how to chain these skills together. So let's describe how we do each of these tasks. First, we want to learn these individual deformable object manipulation skills, which we will do by running trajectory optimization in the simulator on different initial and goal configurations. The goal configuration will be defined by a goal point cloud, and we will have a loss that will be the earth mover's distance between the current dough configuration and the final dough configuration. In this case, we have an advantage, which is that we are trying to we're optimizing these skills in a differentiable simulator, which is known as Plasticine Lab. So because we have a differentiable simulator, the trajectory optimization becomes a lot easier. So given some initial state and some proposed action, we can run this through the simulator to get the next state, continue with the next action until we reach the final state. We can then compare this final state to the goal. And because the simulator is differentiable, we can backpropagate all the way through to all of the individual actions and optimize those. So the key here is that the differentiable simulator allows us to backpropagate through to the actions throughout the trajectory. Using this gradient-based approach of trajectory optimization, we can optimize these trajectories in about 5 minutes per trajectory, as opposed to using a gradient-free trajectory optimizer would take a couple of hours. Okay, now that's great if we have a simulator, but how do we actually run these skills in the real world? So in order to run them in the real world, we behavior clone these optimized trajectories into a policy. So this policy will take as input a point cloud, observation, and then output an action. So we'll have a policy for each of the different skills. We have a cut policy, a spread policy, etc. Okay, so now that we've learned these skills, how do we plan to chain these skills together to achieve the task? And this is where the idea of neural representations is going to come in. To explain why we need to chain skills together, because we're doing gradient-based trajectory optimization, it depends on the local on the initialization and can get stuck in local optima, especially when you're trying to optimize over very long horizons. So to avoid that issue, we use gradient-based trajectory optimization only to optimize these very short horizon skills for which there are fewer local optima, and then we chain them together. Okay, so in order to plan over these skills, we're going to need some kind of skill abstraction. So for example, for the cut skill, we'll have a set of demonstrations, and then we can take an observation point cloud, a goal point cloud from these observations, from the demonstration, and train what we call a feasibility predictor, which is going to be some score between 0 and 1, which indicates whether or not we can reach the goal from some observation using this skill. We also have a reward predictor, which essentially is going to give us the distance between the observation and the goal. So the way we'll train the feasibility predictor is essentially it's a classifier that takes as input the observation and the goal, and we will have trajectories from our trajectory optimizer. If you have two observations from the same trajectory, then that's a positive example because you know that you can reach this second observation from the first observation using the skill. So you would want your feasibility predictor to output a 1 for that. If you have two observations from two different trajectories, we'll treat that as a negative example. So we'll just assume that we cannot reach this observation from this observation. Okay, so next we will use this neural representation of these skills to plan the sequence of steps to go from the observation to the goal. So initially, we will assume that we know the skeleton for the plan. So we'll assume that we know that we want to perform lift followed by spread. And so we have an observation and a goal. We'll compress these into a latent vector. And now we'll plan in this latent space. So we're going to plan to perform first a lift action. So we want some sub-goal, which is feasible to reach from the initial observation using the lift skill. Then we will perform spread. So we want a sub-goal that's feasible using the spread skill. And then finally, we'll compare this latent vector to the goal representation using the reward predictor. We get a trajectory score by combining these three scores. So we need the entire trajectory to be feasible for each individual skill and to have a final state that is as close as possible to the goal. So we essentially multiply these scores together to get the trajectory score. And all of these functions are differentiable. So we backpropagate through them to optimize over the individual subgoals. That assumed that we knew the skeleton of lift spread. We'll just search over the different possible skeletons in order to achieve the in order to figure out which skeleton is the best. So for each of these skeletons, we will optimize over the trajectory, get a trajectory score, and then choose a skeleton that has the highest score. Okay, here you can see a visualization of this. So the observation and the goal are shown here, although we actually are planning in the latent space. Here you can see the sub-goals that we're optimizing. So this is sort of a reconstruction of the latent sub-goals. And you can see now we have sub-goals that achieve the different steps. So lift, then spread, and now we're at the goal. Okay, so to execute the plan, we just input the observation and the sub-goal into our lift policy, and then the next sub-goal into the spread policy. Here you can see a visualization of what this looks like. So first we'll lift, and then we'll spread, and that achieves the goal that we had in mind. In simulation, we use a point cloud-based policy that we've trained. In the real world, we have a heuristic policy that we've designed that can take as input the sub-goal locations and executes the different skills. Okay, so putting this together, we learn the short horizon skills. We plan in the latent space how to chain these skills together to achieve the task. And finally, we execute the plan. So here are some quantitative results compared to just using a trajectory optimizer, just training a model-free policy, and our method, which is going to be shown in yellow. So here you can see just using a trajectory optimizer doesn't work very well. Just training a model-free policy, whereas our method has much better performance. Okay, so the basic idea here is to use to plan over this neural skill abstraction to chain these skills together to achieve a long horizon task for deformable object manipulation. Okay, now that we've achieved that, we said, how can we push this further? And we want to be able to generalize to reason over more sets of objects. So if you cut the object into multiple pieces, how can you reason over these different pieces? And how can we achieve even longer horizon skills than we've ever seen during training? So if we take these two new harder tasks, cut, rearrange, spread, and cut, rearrange, spread twice are the names of these two harder tasks, all of the methods achieve 0 performance, which motivates our next approach, which is to use a latent set representation. So given some point cloud observation, we will first cluster the points into 2 different sets. And then we will encode each point separate point cloud into a latent vector, and we combine these latent vectors to form our latent set representation. So we'll assume that we have some arbitrary number of separate point clouds in our latent set, and now we want to plan over these latent sets. So how do we plan over latent sets? We need now a skill abstraction over latent sets. So remember, we had a feasibility predictor. Now we have a set feasibility predictor. So given some arbitrary number of point clouds in our latent set, we can basically max pool them and predict, again, a feasibility score of if you can reach some goal from some observation, starting from one latent set observation to another latent set goal, given some particular skill. We also now need a reward predictor over a latent set. So in this case, we use the Hungarian matching algorithm, where we'll have a latent set of observations, a latent set of goals, and we want to see how far apart these are from each other. We don't necessarily know the correspondence between them, so we use a Hungarian matching algorithm to find the optimal correspondence between these 2 sets. And then we compute the distance between those matches, and that gives us a reward. So using this modification, we can now do something similar to before for planning. So we have the observation and the goal. the observation in this example is just one latent vector. The goal is a set of 2 latent vectors. And now we plan over this sequence of actions. So we have a cut action, which splits this one latent vector into 2 latent vectors. Again, we don't know what these subgoals yet will be because we don't know how we're going to execute the cut action yet until we've optimized over these latent vectors. Next, we'll perform push on this one latent vector, spread on this other one. This is just a proposed planned skeleton. We'll search over different possible skeletons. And finally, we have the sub-reward predictor. All of these functions are still differentiable, so we can, again, obtain the trajectory score by combining the feasibility predictors and the reward predictors into a single trajectory score and backpropagate to optimize over the individual latent subset subgoals. So here you can see a visualization of that. So we have an observation and a goal, and here are 2 different plans that we can form where we're optimizing over the different subgoals to reach from the observation to the goal. So you can see that they both start with basically a cut action, but then they rearrange the goals in different orders to get them into rearrange the pieces of dough in different order to reach the goal configuration. Okay, so using this new approach that we call pasta, we're able to achieve very good performance in the previous tasks, but now we're able to achieve these longer horizon tasks as well that require planning over sets of entities and also involve an even longer horizon sequence of actions. So the basic idea here is that we have both a spatial abstraction and a temporal abstraction, where the spatial abstraction is this latent set that we're going to plan over, and the temporal abstraction is this neural abstraction of these skills using feasibility predictors and reward predictors that we're going to plan over to achieve the long horizon task. Okay, so here you can see we also do this in the real world. In the real world, we have this top-down camera. We have kinetic sand that is our sort of our dough. We have a few different tools that we're going to use, and we have a tool changer that the robot will stick its gripper in to swap between the different tools that are attached to the end effector. Okay, so we're going to show that we can transfer the planner to the real world with these different skills: cut, push, and roll. Here you can see the first example. This is our initial observation. Here's the target. And so here's the target, and you can see, so we've done planning in the background. Here you can see the each sequential sub-goal that we're trying to reach shown in orange. So the first sub-goal will be to form a cut. And you can see it was able to form the cut to reach that sub-goal. The next sub-goal will be to push one of the pieces of dough up to the top. So you can see that us executing that sub-goal as well. And then finally pushing the other piece of dough down to the bottom. Okay, here's another example where in this case, we have this longer horizon task in which we have this piece of dough that we want to split into a small piece here and then 2 longer pieces here. So we're going to have to cut it. Then the next step, sorry, I'm not sure where it's stopping, is to move this piece of dough over here. Then we're going to have to switch the spreader to get into the right shape. And then we repeat the task. So it's forming a second cut. Then pushing the second piece over into the correct position, and then spreading again. Great. Cool. So, okay. I think I'll skip through this. Okay, so to kind of wrap up this section, we use a neural skill abstraction to enable effective skill chaining for deformable objects. We combine this with a latent separate representation, which enables us to generalize to more DOE entities and long horizon. And then we transfer the planner from simulation to the real world to perform these tasks. Cool. So the next project that I want to tell you about with the remaining time is about joint grasp and motion optimization using neural grasp distance fields. Sorry for not mentioning earlier. So the previous project was led by my student Xingyu Lin, and this project is led by my former student Thomas Wang. Okay, so the basic problem setting here is we want to do joint six-stuff grasping and motion optimization. So traditionally, if you want to grasp an object, you would first observe the object that you want to grasp, predict what grasps you want to execute, and then given those grasps, either one grasp or a set of grasps, you can plan a trajectory to those grasps. What we want to do is jointly optimize over the grasping and the motion planning. And furthermore, instead of having just a discrete set of grasps that we're going to select between during the motion optimization step, we want to be able to optimize over a continuous manifold of grasps. So here you can see just kind of what this is eventually going to look like. So given some object, we're going to optimize over the grasp and motion plan using these three different costs: grasp cost, obstacle cost, also collision cost and smoothness cost. And you can see us finding a trajectory to reach the goal. Okay, so how are we going to achieve this? So we're going to represent grasps as a neural field. As an analogy to other neural representations, if you recall deep SDF, you have some query point in space, some object that you want to represent, which you might embed into some latent vector, and then you train this deep SDF function to output the distance between the query point and the surface of the object. And you can use that to reconstruct the object shape. Now, our approach will have some similarities to that. What we're going to do is take an object, and we have a potential grasp, which we represent as some grasp pose. And we have a layer representation for the object shape as well. And what we're going to output is the distance between this grasp pose and the nearest good grasp. So instead of outputting the distance to the object shape for reconstruction, since our goal is grasping, we're going to output the distance to the nearest good grasp of this object. Okay. So to create a cost function for this, so how do we define grasp distance? You could imagine, so grasp distance involves some combination of the gripper translation and the gripper rotation. And you might have to think about how do you weigh the translation and rotation components. To simplify that problem, what we do instead is we imagine a set of 6 control points on the gripper, and you have the same 6 control points on the gripper in the good grasp pose. And now we look at the distance between each of the corresponding control points, and just average those distances together. And that gives you a final distance between the current grasp pose and the target good grasp pose. Okay, so we're going to train this on a large data set of simulated grasps and random query grasp poses. We base this off of the acronym data set, although acronym was sort of labeled using NVIDIA's Flex Simulator, and we're using PyBullets. We have to relabel all of the acronym grasps, but in the end, we get a set of labeled grasps of which ones are good and which ones are bad. And then we can use that to train this function, which we can use to optimize the gripper from some initial location to the target location, which is ideally one of the good grasp poses. Okay, now that's just for optimizing the gripper, but we have other considerations for motion planning. So we're going to have to combine this with motion planning. So to kind of explain how this works, we have our robot, we have the final joint angles. You can pass that through a forward kinematic function to get the gripper pose. We also have the object point cloud, which we embed into some shape. We input these into our neural grasp distance field to get the distance to the best good grasp. That distance becomes one of our cost functions in our optimization that we can backpropagate through the neural grasp distance field and through the forward kinematics to be able to update the joint angles of the robot. We do that because we're going to be optimizing this jointly with these different terms for the trajectory optimizer. So we have the grasp cost function. We also have the smoothness cost function that we want a smooth trajectory, and we have an obstacle collision cost function. So we jointly optimize over these three cost functions to find a trajectory that is smooth, avoids obstacles, and leads to a good grasp. So this is joint optimization over grasp and motion planning. Here you can see a comparison to some different methods. So the methods have different properties that I'll explain here. First is a couple of oracle methods that assume a known object pose and a known discrete set of grasps, and they just need to optimize for the plan and grasp over these known grasp poses. And if everything is known, then the success rate is very high, above 90%. Next, we compare to objects that methods that make fewer assumptions. So if you don't assume you know the grasp, the object pose, then you have to predict the grasps. Here are 4 different methods that predict a discrete set of grasps and then optimize a trajectory to one of those discrete set of grasps using different grasp selection methods. Finally, our method optimizes over, again, an unknown object pose, but in this case, using a continuous set of grasps using our neural grasp distance function. And you can see that our performance is significantly higher than the other methods that also assume an unknown object pose, although lower than the oracle method that assume a known object pose. Okay, we test our method both in simulation and also in the real world. We're, in this case, going to train a separate function for each category. So ball grasping, bull grasping, and mud grasping. And here's an example of our workspace. We have 4 different Connect cameras that we've combined together to create a point cloud. And here you can see the optimization. So it's optimizing over the trajectory using the approach we just described. And here you can see the 3 different cost functions that it's optimizing over. And then once the optimization has converged, then we execute the motion plan and grasp to be able to grasp the object. Okay, so to summarize, we use neural fields to turn grasping into a continuous optimization problem. And we jointly, we use a joint grasping and trajectory optimization framework with neural fields to balance these different cost functions of grasping, smoothness, and collision cost. So as just a closing remark, I've shown how we can use neural representations in 2 different ways. We can use them for continuous optimization over grasping and motion trajectories. That's one advantage of using a neural representation. Another advantage of using a neural representation is that it can be very fast for computation. In certain cases, for example, in the first project, we showed how we can plan over latent representations to perform this long horizon dome manipulation task. which is much faster than planning over raw point clouds. I'll also say that I have other projects that I've worked on where I don't use neural representation, so I don't think you should always use them. For example, I have other projects where I'm manipulating crumpled cloth or doing very precise placement tasks. And if you want precision over object details, I've personally found that using point cloud representations can be better than neural representations because the point cloud can maintain some of the object details that can get compressed if you're planning over a latent representation of the object. Obviously, there's much more to say about this. We'll hear from other speakers as well, but I just wanted to give my quick perspective on neural representations. Great, thanks very much.
We have a time for maybe 2 questions. Any questions?
Over the pasta and like those graphs, the main thing that I was wondering, like what is the scale of the elevation? How do you elevate the are the objects out of the training set, or do you just do the same objects as you're being done? For example, for pasta, like was the dough the same dough that you used in the training set, or the different dough instead?
That's a great question. So in simulation, the dough is the same between train and test, but we also test in the real world on both kinetic sand and real dough. I will say that real dough, actually, there's many different kinds of dough depending on the combination of like flour, water, etc. that you include. So we did have to play a little bit with the consistency to get it to be pliable enough for the robot. In terms of the tasks, we do have tasks in the test set that are kind of out of distribution from the training tasks that involve sort of this long combination of skills, whereas we train on just individual skills and then learn to chain them together. So that it's out of distribution kind of in that sense. For the grasping, we train on a set of objects and then test on unseen objects. So we train on some bottles and test on unseen bottles.
Oh, okay.
So you're saying, if I got that right, for some tasks you're not using representation because they are lacking precision. But in the first method you outlined, you also showed that you're not taking like the perfect knowledge of and training the SDF directly on the object, right? You take latent vector, which is then going into your SDF.
Right.
Are you lagging still this precision for complex tasks if you would train the SDF directly on the object, if you would have that knowledge?
That's a good point. I personally have seen only limited work on using neural representations for cloth because it's a very thin structure, could have multiple layers, crumpled, wrinkles, things like that. And so I've tried, I haven't been successful in using neural representations for cloth. So far, the approaches that I found to be successful use a point cloud representation. But yeah, there's probably more work to be done in that area.
Right, thanks.